Video 21, Part 19b of 25, Inputs to the Plan Risk Management Process. The purpose of this video is to develop a WBS to present the inputs to the Plan Risk Management Process. The Plan Risk Management Process is the first process in the Project Risk Management knowledge area and is related to the Planning Process Group. Please click the like button. Subscribe to my channel and share with others. Thank you. How important is the input of Project Charter to the PMBOK Plan Risk Management Process? The input of the Project Charter to the Plan Risk Management Process is fundamentally important and serves as a critical foundation. It is not just another input. It provides the essential guardrails and strategic context without which risk planning would be ungrounded and potentially misaligned. Here's a breakdown of why it's so crucial. Based on the PMBOK Guide. 1. It provides high-level project boundaries and constraints. The Project Charter authorizes the project and formally defines its initial boundaries. Key elements from the Charter that directly feed into risk planning include: first, project purpose, objectives, and success criteria. You cannot identify what threatens your success if you don't first know what success looks like. The Project Charter's high-level objectives are what risks will ultimately jeopardize. Second, high-level requirements. These initial requirements point the risk management team toward areas where scope creep, misunderstandings, or technical challenges are likely to occur, as follows. First, key milestones and summary schedule. Any high-level deadline is a major source of schedule risk. The Plan Risk Management Process must establish how the project will handle risks to these critical dates. Second, budgetary information and high-level cost estimates. The pre-approved budget is a primary constraint and a significant source of cost risk. The risk management plan must account for the tolerance levels around this budget. Third, assumptions and constraints. This is arguably the most direct link. Assumptions are potential risks. In other words, if they are incorrect, they become issues. Constraints, like a fixed deadline or budget, naturally create risks. For example, we risk quality if we must meet this fixed deadline with a fixed budget. The Plan Risk Management Process formalizes how these will be analyzed and managed. 2. It defines authority and establishes the project manager's mandate. The Project Charter formally appoints the project manager and grants them the authority to apply organizational resources to the project. This is vital for the Plan Risk Management Process because: first, risk management requires resources. The project manager needs the authority from the Project Charter to secure team members' time for risk workshops, tools for risk analysis, and budget for contingency reserves. Second, it legitimizes the process. When the project manager initiates risk planning, they are acting under the authority granted by the Project Charter. 3. It identifies key stakeholders. The Project Charter typically names the project sponsor, key customers, and sometimes other main stakeholders. Knowing who these key players are is essential for planning how to manage risk, as they will be involved in defining risk thresholds, participating in risk reviews, and making decisions on risk responses. 4. It sets the project's strategic context and business case. The business case in the Project Charter explains why the project is being done. This strategic context is critical for risk prioritization. A risk that threatens the core business objective, such as fails to capture 10% market share, is far more significant than a risk that only causes a minor delay. The Plan Risk Management Process must be tailored to focus on protecting the project's strategic value, which is defined in the Charter. How can a poor Project Charter analysis harm the PMBOK Plan Risk Management Process? A poor analysis of the Project Charter doesn't just make the Plan Risk Management process harder. It fundamentally corrupts it, leading to a risk management plan that is misaligned, incomplete, and potentially useless. Here's a detailed breakdown of how a poor charter analysis directly harms the plan risk management process. 1. Blind to strategic risks. The problem here lies in the lack of understanding of the business case and strategic objectives presented in the project charter. The detriment to risk management lies in the fact the team will prioritize tactical risks, such as a software module might be delivered late, over strategic risks that could kill the project's business value, such as a competitor releases a superior product before us, making our project obsolete. You might successfully manage a project to on time and on budget completion, only to discover it failed to achieve its core business purpose, a risk you never identified because you didn't understand the why. 2. Misguided risk appetite and thresholds. The problem here lies in the lack of a thorough analysis of the high-level budget, milestones, and success criteria to understand the organization's true constraints and tolerance levels. The detriment to risk management lies in the fact that the plan risk management process defines risk appetite, or the degree of uncertainty an organization is willing to take on, and risk thresholds, or the specific points at which a risk becomes unacceptable. A poor analysis leads to a risk plan that is either too lax or overly paranoid. For example, if the charter mandates a must-hit market launch date, the schedule risk threshold is very low, requiring aggressive risk responses. If this is missed, the plan will be ineffective. 3. Ignoring the most critical assumption-based risks. The problem here lies in treating the assumptions and constraints in the charter as mere statements rather than a primary source of risks. The harm to risk management lies in the fact that this is one of the most direct and damaging failures. Assumptions are future risks in disguise. A poor analysis means these inherent risks are never logged, analyzed, or planned for. For example, the project charter assumes key subject matter experts will be available 20% of their time. A poor analysis accepts this. A good analysis immediately flags it as a major resource risk. When the assumption proves false, it becomes a crippling issue that the team is unprepared for. 4. Incomplete stakeholder analysis for risk engagement. The problem lies in the negligence of the key stakeholders listed in the project charter, such as the sponsor and the client. The detriment to risk management lies in the fact that the plan risk management process must define roles and responsibilities for risk management. Without knowing who the key decision makers are, you cannot plan for who will approve contingency budgets, make critical decisions on risk responses, or participate in risk reviews. This leads to paralysis when a major risk occurs. 5. Scope creep from the very start. The problem here lies in the fact that there is a vague understanding of the high-level project and product scope. The detriment to risk management lies in the fact that the risk management plan will fail to establish clear protocols for managing scope-related risks. If the boundaries of the project are fuzzy from the start, the team will be constantly reacting to scope change requests as issues rather than proactively managing the risk of scope creep. This turns risk management into firefighting. 6. Wasted effort and theater of risk management. The problem here lies in creating a risk management plan based on a flawed foundation. The detriment to risk management lies in the fact that the entire risk process becomes a bureaucratic exercise or a theater. The team identifies and tracks risks, but they are often the wrong ones, are low impact and not aligned with strategic objectives. The project appears to be managing risk, but the real, charter-level threats are left unaddressed, dooming the project to failure even if all the identified risks are mitigated. In conclusion, the project charter is not a mere formality to be checked off. For the plan risk management process, it is a primary source of strategic direction and constraints. It provides the essential context that ensures the risk management plan is relevant, focused, and aligned with the project's ultimate goals and boundaries. Without the project charter, risk management would be a generic exercise, disconnected from the specific realities and strategic aims of the project. On the other hand, a poor project charter analysis doesn't just provide bad input to the plan risk management process, it poisons the well. It ensures that the entire subsequent risk management lifecycle, from identification through to monitoring, is built on a foundation of sand. The project team will be diligently managing the wrong risks, blind to the true threats that were embedded in the project's defining document from the very beginning. As a final message, the project charter is fundamental to plan risk management, as it provides the project's objectives, constraints, and high-level risks. A well-analyzed charter ensures risk planning is aligned with project scope and authority. A poor analysis leads to a flawed risk management foundation. This results in unidentified critical threats and missed opportunities, causing scope creep, budget overruns, and ultimate project failure due to unmanaged uncertainties. How important is the input of project management plan to the PMBOK plan risk management process? The input of the project management plan to the plan risk management process is critically important and foundational. It is not just one input among many, it is the primary source of context, constraints, and objectives that shape the entire risk management effort. Context is everything for risk. You cannot plan how to manage risk in a vacuum. The how, when, and why of risk management are entirely dependent on the project's specific characteristics, which are defined in the project management plan. Key components of the project management plan and their influence on plan risk management. The project management plan is an integrated set of subsidiary plans. Each of these provides essential information for designing the risk management approach. 1. Project scope statement and scope baseline. They are important because defines the project's deliverables, assumptions, and constraints. Risks are fundamentally uncertainties that can impact project objectives, and the scope baseline defines the primary objective, what needs to be delivered. And its influence on risk planning is presented as follows. First, assumptions and constraints. Every assumption is a potential risk if it proves false. Every constraint, like a fixed budget or deadline, is a key area where risk impact must be evaluated. Second, scope creep. A well-defined scope helps identify risks related to uncontrolled changes. Third, WBS. The work breakdown structure allows for risk identification and analysis at a detailed level. 2. Schedule and cost baselines. They are important because these are the approved targets for project time and cost. They represent key project objectives that risks can threaten. And its influence on risk planning is presented as follows. First, risk thresholds. The schedule and cost baselines help determine the project's risk thresholds, such as how much of a schedule slip is acceptable. Second, contingency reserves. The plan risk management process will define how to calculate contingency reserves for time and cost, which are directly added to these baselines. Third, schedule critical path. Risks to activities on the critical path are far more significant and require more aggressive management strategies. 3. Resource management plan. It is important because details the types and quantities of resources needed. And its influence on risk planning is presented as follows. First, identifies risks related to resource availability, skill gaps, team location, and procurement. Second, helps determine the level of effort required for risk management activities, or who will do it. 4. Stakeholder engagement plan. It is important because identifies key stakeholders, their expectations, and their level of influence. And its influence on risk planning is presented as follows. First, risk attitudes. Different stakeholders have different risk tolerances. The project's overall risk appetite is a composite of key stakeholders' attitudes. Second, communication. Determines how risk information will be communicated and to whom. A highly risk-averse stakeholder may require more frequent and detailed risk reports. 5. Communications management plan. It is important because defines the methods, frequency, and recipients of project information. And its influence on risk planning lies in the fact that it directly informs the communications section of the risk management plan, specifying how risks will be reported, escalated, and discussed in meetings. 6. Quality management plan. It is important because sets the quality standards and metrics for the project. And its influence on risk planning is presented as follows. First, identifies risks related to technical performance, failure to meet standards, or rework. Second, the quality policy might influence how rigorously risks are analyzed. 7. Procurement strategy and management plan. It is important because outlines what will be acquired from outside the project team. And its influence on risk planning is presented as follows. First, major source of risks, such as vendor failure, contract disputes, and cost overruns. Second, influences whether risks will be transferred to a third party via contract. How can a poor project management plan analysis harm the PMBOK plan risk management process? A poor analysis of the project management plan doesn't just make the plan risk management process harder. It fundamentally undermines it, leading to a risk management plan that is ineffective, irrelevant, and ultimately, a waste of resources. Consequences of a poor project management plan analysis on risk planning. 1. Poor analysis of scope baseline and requirements. The harm caused lies in the fact that the risk process will focus on the wrong things. The specific outcomes are presented as follows. First, missing major risks. If the scope is vague or key requirements are overlooked, the most significant risks to project success will never be identified. You can't manage a risk you don't know exists. Second, wasted effort on trivial risks. The team may spend time analyzing and planning for minor risks while blind to the tripwire risks embedded in poor scope definition. Third, assumptions become landmines. Unvalidated assumptions in the scope statement are unmanaged risks. For example, assuming a key resource will be available is a major risk if not analyzed and planned for. 2. Poor analysis of schedule and cost baselines. The harm caused lies in the fact that the project will have an unrealistic tolerance for risk and inadequate reserves. The specific outcomes are presented as follows. First, incorrect risk thresholds. If the schedule is already overly optimistic, with a death march project, the team's ability to define meaningful schedule risk thresholds is eliminated. Any variance will be a crisis. Second, insufficient contingency reserves, without a realistic baseline. The contingency reserves, or time and cost, calculated during quantitative risk analysis will be meaningless. The project will burn through its reserves almost immediately. Third, misplaced priority. Without understanding the true critical path, the team may prioritize responses for non-critical risks while ignoring those that directly threaten the project end date. 3. Poor analysis of the stakeholder engagement plan. The harm caused lies in the fact that the project will be blindsided by stakeholder-driven risks and will misjudge its own risk appetite. The specific outcomes are presented as follows. First, misunderstanding risk appetite. The single most common cause of project failure is stakeholder mismanagement. If you don't know a key stakeholder has zero tolerance for cost overruns, you might prioritize schedule risks over budget risks, a fatal strategic error. Second, failure in risk communication. Risks will be communicated to the wrong people, at the wrong time, or in the wrong way, leading to surprise, lack of support, and rejected risk responses. 4. Poor analysis of resource and procurement plans. The harm caused lies in the fact that the project will be unprepared for the most likely and impactful resource-related risks. The specific outcomes are presented as follows. First, unplanned resource shortfalls. Failure to analyze the resource plan leads to missing risks like skill gaps, team member unavailability, or burnout. Second, catastrophic supplier failure. A poor procurement analysis means not identifying high-risk vendors or single points of failure in the supply chain. The risk of a key supplier going out of business would be a catastrophic oversight. 5. Poor analysis of quality and communications plans. The harm caused lies in the fact that the risk process will be culturally and procedurally disconnected from the project's execution environment. The specific outcomes are presented as follows. First, ignoring technical and compliance risks. Without understanding the quality standards, the team may miss risks related to technical performance, regulatory non-compliance, or excessive rework. Second, ineffective risk culture. The risk process becomes a paperwork exercise. If the communications plan isn't analyzed, risk discussions won't be integrated into regular team meetings and risk ownership will be unclear. In conclusion, to say the project management plan is an important input to plan risk management is an understatement. It is the essential prerequisite. Without it, the risk management plan would be a generic, one-size-fits-all document with little relevance to the project's unique environment, objectives, and constraints. The integration of these plans is what makes project management, and risk management in particular, a disciplined and tailored practice rather than a theoretical exercise. On the other hand, with an inadequate analysis of the project management plan, we may have the illusion of control. The project team and stakeholders believe that risks are being managed because there is a document called a risk management plan. However, this plan is not connected to the project's reality. When real risks materialize, as they always do, the team discovers that their plan is useless. They are forced to react chaotically, leading to budget overruns, missed deadlines, and compromised scope. The time and money spent on the initial risk planning process become a sunk cost, and the project's chance of success diminishes significantly. As a final message, a robust risk management plan is completely dependent on a deep and accurate analysis of the integrated project management plan. Without it, risk management is just a theoretical exercise that provides no real defense against uncertainty. How important is the input of project documents to the plan risk management process? The input of project documents is critically important to the plan risk management process. It's not just a minor formality, it is the foundation upon which effective risk management is built. The core reason is that context is everything. The plan risk management process is about defining how you will conduct risk management for this specific project. You cannot define a meaningful approach without a deep understanding of the project's unique context, objectives, constraints, and stakeholders. Project documents provide this essential context. The PMBOK guide and other standards highlight several key documents. Here's how the most important ones directly shape the plan risk management process. 1. Project Charter. This is the most fundamental input because it provides the high-level boundaries and authorizations, as follows. First, project purpose and objectives. Risks are threats or opportunities to these objectives, and therefore it is essential to know them in order to identify the risks. Second, high-level risks. The charter often lists initial, known risks, setting the stage for further analysis. Third, key stakeholders. You need to know who has an interest to plan stakeholder risk appetite and communication. Fourth, summary budget and milestones. These are key constraints that risks can impact. 2. Stakeholder register. Risk management is fundamentally about communicating with and influencing stakeholders, as follows. First, who to engage in risk identification workshops and analysis. Second, what their risk appetite and tolerance are, such as the client is very risk-averse or while the sponsor is a risk-taker. This directly influences the thresholds you set in the risk management plan. Third, their influence and interest, which helps plan risk communication and response strategies. 3. Assumption and constraint log. This is a direct feed for risk identification, as follows. First, assumptions. Every assumption is a potential risk if it proves false. The risk management process must include a way to validate and monitor these. Second, constraints. Fixed deadlines, budgets, or scope are significant constraints that create risks. Your risk process must focus heavily on these areas. 4. Requirements documentation and scope definition. The project scope statement, the WBS, and the WBS dictionary define what is within and outside the scope as follows. First, scope creep is a classic risk. The risk management plan must define how to handle proposed changes that arise from risk responses. Second, technical or complex requirements are high-risk areas that may need specialized risk analysis techniques. 5. Schedule and cost baselines. These are the primary performance measurement benchmarks, as follows. First, the risk management process must be integrated with performance measurement, such as using earned value management. Second, you will set specific risk thresholds, such as a 10% cost overrun triggers a risk review meeting based on these baselines. 6. Lessons learned register. Provides historical data from past projects as follows. First, what risks occurred before? Second, what risk responses worked or failed? Third, this allows you to avoid past mistakes and replicate past successes, making your risk management plan more effective from the start. How can a poor project documents analysis harm the plan risk management process? A poor analysis of project documents doesn't just slightly hinder the plan risk management process. It fundamentally undermines and cripples it. The plan risk management process is about defining how you will conduct risk management activities for the project. If you base this how to plan on incomplete, inaccurate, or misunderstood information, the entire subsequent risk management effort is built on a shaky foundation. Here's a breakdown of how poor project documents analysis specifically harms the plan risk management process. 1. Creates a flawed and incomplete risk context. The plan risk management process requires you to understand the project's environment, constraints, and objectives to tailor the risk approach. Poor document analysis leads to, first, misunderstood project scope. Without a clear understanding of the project scope, obtained from the scope statement or work breakdown structure, you will not be able to identify risks related to scope creep, gold plating, or missing deliverables. Your risk management process may focus on completely wrong areas. Second, ignored key constraints. If you omit critical details in the project charter, such as a fixed deadline, a tight budget limit, or mandatory regulatory standards, you will not be able to plan for the identification of risks related to schedule compression, budget overruns, or compliance failures. Third, unidentified key stakeholders. A poor analysis of the stakeholder register means you may overlook influential stakeholders. Your risk management process will not take into account the risks arising from resistance from these parties, changes in expectations, or lack of engagement. As a result of these 3 points, the risk management plan is designed for a project that doesn't exist, focusing on trivial issues while missing the most significant threats and opportunities. 2. Leads to an ineffective and misguided risk strategy. The plan risk management process outputs the risk management plan, which includes the methodology, roles, timing, and risk categories. Poor input analysis corrupts these outputs as follows. First, ineffective risk categories. Risk categories, often using a risk breakdown structure, should be tailored to the project. If you haven't analyzed technical documents, contracts, or assumptions logs, your categories will be generic and useless. For example, you might miss a whole category like supplier integration risks because you poorly analyzed the procurement plan. Second, inappropriate scoring models. Risk probability and impact matrices are calibrated based on project objectives. If you don't understand the true project priorities, such as is time more critical than cost, you will create a scoring system that misrepresents the severity of risks. Third, poorly defined roles and responsibilities. Without understanding the project's organizational structure and stakeholder authority, obtained from the project charter or stakeholder register, you might assign risk action owners who lack the power or budget to handle them. As a result of these 3 points, the team uses a flawed system that misprioritizes risks and assigns them to the wrong people, leading to wasted effort and ignored critical issues. 3. Misses critical assumptions and dependencies. Project documents are filled with assumptions and constraints. A superficial analysis fails to scrutinize them as follows. First, unchallenged assumptions. Every assumption is a potential risk. If the project plan assumes key resources will be available, but you don't analyze this, you won't plan to identify the risk of those resources being pulled away. Second, overlook dependencies. Dependencies, internal or external, are major risk sources. A poor analysis of the project schedule or interface agreements means you won't plan to monitor risks related to a delayed predecessor task or a slipping third-party vendor. As a result of these 2 points, the risk management process is blind to the ticking time bombs already baked into the project plan. The biggest risks are the ones you never see coming because they were hidden in plain sight within an unanalyzed document. 4. Wastes resources and erodes credibility. A risk management process built on poor analysis is inefficient and ineffective, as follows. First, chasing phantoms. The team spends time identifying, analyzing, and responding to risks that are irrelevant or low impact, while high impact risks go unnoticed. Second, late discovery of major risks. When a major risk, that was actually evident in the project documents, materializes, it appears as a surprise. This makes the risk management process look incompetent and destroys stakeholder confidence. Third, reactive, not proactive. The project team is forced into a constant firefighting mode because the proactive risk identification mechanism, which is the risk management plan, was broken from the start. In conclusion, the plan risk management process is essentially a meta process. It's the plan for how to do risk management. It's impossible to create an effective plan without fully understanding what is being planned. The input of project documents transforms the plan risk management process from a bureaucratic exercise into a strategic, contextual, and value-adding activity. It provides the essential raw material needed to craft a risk management approach that is truly fit for purpose. On the other hand, a poor project documents analysis ensures that the risk management process is blind, misguided, and ultimately, a bureaucratic exercise rather than a strategic tool for ensuring project success. It turns risk management from a proactive shield into a reactive, and often useless, post-mortem. As a final message, with project documents, you are tailoring a precise, proactive, and cost-effective risk strategy that addresses the real challenges and opportunities of your project. In contrast, without project documents, you are creating a generic, one-size-fits-all risk management plan that is likely irrelevant or inefficient. How important is the input of enterprise environmental factors to the plan risk management process? The input of enterprise environmental factors is critically important to the plan risk management process. It is not just an input to be checked off a list. It is the foundational context that shapes how risk management will be conducted on the project. In simple terms, you cannot plan how to manage risk without first understanding the environment in which the project exists. Here's a detailed breakdown of why enterprise environmental factors are so vital to the plan risk management process. 1. Define the risk appetite and culture. This is the most significant impact. Enterprise environmental factors answer the question, how much risk are we, as an organization, willing to take? First, organizational culture. Is the company conservative and risk-averse, or innovative and risk-tolerant? A startup might accept high risks for high rewards, while a government agency might have a near-zero tolerance for safety risks. Second, risk appetite and thresholds. The organization's predefined levels of acceptable risk directly dictate the rigor of your risk management plan. A low-risk appetite means you need a more thorough and formal risk process. Third, stakeholder risk tolerance. The overall tolerance of key stakeholders, including senior management, sets the boundaries for your risk responses. Considering the impact of these 3 points on the plan, we observe that a risk-averse culture will lead to a plan with more frequent risk reviews, lower risk limits, and a preference for risk mitigation strategies. A risk-tolerant culture will have a leaner process and will be more open to risk-sharing or acceptance. 2. Provide the rules of the game, governance and standards. Enterprise environmental factors establish the pre-existing frameworks you must work within, as follows. First, regarding to industry standards, regulations, such as SOX and GDPR, government standards, and quality standards, such as ISO, impose specific risks and compliance requirements that your plan must address. Second, regarding to organizational process assets, often overlapping. While organizational process assets are a separate input, enterprise environmental factors include the company's established risk management policies, defined risk categories, common templates, and reporting frameworks. Third, legal and contractual requirements. These can dictate specific risk management activities, such as mandatory insurance, bonding, or specific safety protocols. Considering the impact of these 3 points on the plan, your risk management plan must align with these standards. You will use the organization's standard risk matrix, risk categories, like PESEL or TECOP, and reporting formats because they are enterprise environmental factors. 3. Determine available resources and tools. The how of risk management is constrained by the organization's capabilities, as follows. First, project management information systems. Does the company have specialized risk management software, or will you be using spreadsheets and documents? This dictates the complexity and detail of your analysis. Second, resource availability. Are there dedicated risk managers? Are there subject matter experts you can consult? The availability of skilled resources determines how sophisticated your risk analysis can be. Third, infrastructure. The physical and technological infrastructure of the organization can be a source of risk or a constraint on your planning. Considering the impact of these 3 points on the plan, a lack of sophisticated tools and dedicated personnel will lead to a simpler, more qualitative risk management plan. An organization with robust systems can support a more complex, quantitative approach. 4. Shape the external and market context. The environment outside your organization is a primary source of risk, as follows. First, market conditions. Are you in a volatile, competitive market or a stable, regulated one? This determines the focus of your risk identification, such as more on competitors versus more on compliance. Second, political climate. Political stability, trade policies, and government support can be significant enterprise environmental factors for international projects. Third, financial climate. The cost and availability of capital, currency exchange rates, and inflation are all enterprise environmental factors that heavily influence financial risk planning. Considering the impact of these 3 points on the plan, a project in a volatile market will have a risk plan that emphasizes frequent environmental scans and agile response strategies. A project in a stable environment might focus more on technical and operational risks. How can a poor enterprise environmental factors analysis harm the plan risk management process? A poor or incomplete analysis of enterprise environmental factors is like planning a trip without checking the weather forecast, nautical charts, or SHIO conditions. This creates the conditions for fundamental failures throughout the risk management process. Here's a detailed breakdown of how a poor enterprise environmental factors analysis can specifically harm the plan risk management process and the project that follows. 1. Creates a plan that is culturally misaligned and ignored. This is the most common and damaging outcome. If you misjudge the organization's risk appetite, you might create a plan that is either far too cautious or dangerously lax, as follows. First, the problem lies in having an overly cautious plan. In a risk-tolerant, fast-moving startup, a highly detailed and bureaucratic risk process will be seen as red tape. The team will bypass it, rendering it useless. Second, the problem lies in having an overly permissive plan. In a risk-averse industry, such as pharmaceuticals or aviation, a lightweight risk plan will fail to identify critical compliance or safety risks, leading to catastrophic failures, fines, or loss of life. Management will reject the plan for being insufficient. 2. Leads to critical blind spots in risk identification. A poor enterprise environmental factors analysis means you don't understand the playing field, so you miss major risks. If you fail to consider external factors and internal constraints, you may face the following problems. First, the problem lies in the lack of consideration of regulatory risks. You may be unaware of a new environmental regulation or data privacy law, like GDPR, leading to massive compliance risks and project derailing fines. Second, the problem lies in the lack of consideration of market risks. You fail to analyze competitor activity or changes in market trends and may be surprised by the launch of a competing product that renders your obsolete project. Third, the problem lies in neglecting resource constraints. You assume that qualified resources are available, but a poor analysis of the company's resource pool, which is an enterprise environmental factors, means you don't see a looming shortage of critical engineers, creating a major schedule risk. 3. Results in an impractical or unusable plan. The plan is built on false assumptions about the organization's capabilities. If you design a risk management process that the organization cannot support, you may face the following problems. First, the problem lies in the fact that you plan for sophisticated Monte Carlo simulations, but the company only has basic spreadsheet software. The quantitative analysis becomes impossible to execute. Second, the problem lies in process overload. You design a process requiring weekly risk reviews by a dedicated committee, but the organizational culture is lean, with everyone wearing multiple hats. The reviews never happen. Third, the problem lies in the lack of ownership. You assign risk responses to roles that don't have the authority or budget to execute them, because you misunderstood the organizational governance structure. 4. Underestimates the complexity of stakeholder management. Enterprise environmental factors include the broader stakeholder landscape and their tolerances. If a poor analysis leads to a misunderstanding of who the key stakeholders are and what they care about, we will have the following problems. First, you fail to identify a powerful, risk-averse internal stakeholder, such as a legal or compliance department. When a risk materializes, they halt the project because the plan didn't address their primary concerns. Second, your communication strategy for risk reporting is misaligned with stakeholder expectations, leading to a loss of confidence and support. 5. Fosters a false sense of security. This is the ultimate danger, believing you are protected when you are not. Imagine if the team and sponsors saw a completed risk management plan and believe the project is risk-free. The problem is that, because the plan is based on a flawed understanding of the environment, the most significant threats are not monitored. The project proceeds confidently until it is hit by a risk that was completely outside the scope of the plan, often with devastating consequences. The plan provided a false sense of control. In conclusion, the input of enterprise environmental factors is fundamental and non-negotiable. It provides the essential context that ensures the risk management plan is not created in a vacuum but is tailored, realistic, and effective for the specific organization and environment in which the project will be executed. On the other hand, a poor enterprise environmental factors analysis doesn't just make the plan risk management process less effective, it corrupts it at its core. The resulting plan is not just a bad document, it is a dangerous one. It is culturally irrelevant, blind to major threats, operationally impractical, and creates an illusion of control that can lead to catastrophic project failure. As a final message, a robust enterprise environmental factors analysis is the essential first step to building a risk management plan that is realistic, respected, and resilient. How important is the input of organizational process assets to the plan risk management process? The input of organizational process assets is critically important and fundamental to the plan risk management process. It is not just an input. It's the foundation upon which the entire risk management plan is built. Here's a detailed breakdown of why it's so crucial. 1. It provides the rulebook for risk management. The plan risk management process is about defining how to conduct risk management for your specific project. You don't start from a blank slate. Organizational process assets provide the pre-existing rules, templates, and standards that your organization has developed, as follows. First, risk management policies. Does your organization have a predefined risk tolerance, such as high, medium, and low? Are there specific financial thresholds that require escalation? These policies directly shape your risk plan. Second, risk categories. Many organizations use a standard risk breakdown structure, which is a classic organizational process assets. This provides a consistent way to categorize risks, such as technical, external, organizational, and project management, ensuring no major area is overlooked. Third, standardized templates. templates for the risk register, risk report, and risk statement formats ensure consistency across all projects and make the process more efficient. 2. It drives efficiency and consistency. Leveraging past experience prevents you from reinventing the wheel for every new project as follows. First, methodologies and procedures. The organization may have a standard methodology for qualitative and quantitative risk analysis, such as specific scoring models and Monte Carlo simulation tools. Second, lessons learned repository. This is arguably one of the most valuable organizational process assets. Historical data from previous projects, such as which risks materialized, which mitigation strategies worked or failed, and which blind spots were discovered, provide valuable and practical information for planning your risk management approach. Third, stakeholder risk appetites. Understanding how stakeholders in previous, similar projects reacted to risks helps you tailor your communication and engagement strategies in your risk plan. 3. It defines roles, communication, and authority. The risk management plan must align with the organization's structure and communication protocols as follows. First, roles and responsibilities. Organizational process assets often define who is responsible for risk management activities. Is there a risk manager? A risk board? The project sponsor? This clarifies authority and accountability from the start. Second, communication requirements. The organization may have standard reporting formats and frequencies for risk reporting, such as a risk section in the monthly project status report. Your risk management plan must incorporate these. Third, decision-making processes. How are risk responses approved? Who has the authority to allocate contingency reserves? Organizational process assets provide the governance framework for these decisions. How can a poor organizational process assets analysis harm the plan risk management process? A poor analysis of organizational process assets during the plan risk management process doesn't just create minor inefficiencies, it fundamentally undermines the entire risk management effort, leading to a plan that is weak, irrelevant, or even dangerous. Here's how a poor organizational process assets analysis can specifically harm the plan risk management process. Moving from the strategic to the practical consequences. 1. A risk management plan built on a weak foundation. The risk management plan becomes a generic, textbook document rather than one tailored to the organization's specific context as follows. First, ignoring organizational risk tolerance. Without understanding the company's appetite for risk, the plan might be overly cautious, stifling innovation and adding unnecessary cost, or dangerously aggressive, allowing high-risk issues to go unmanaged. For example, a startup might have a high-risk tolerance for speed to market, while a nuclear plant has zero tolerance for safety risks. A poor analysis misses this crucial nuance. Second, using ineffective or outdated methodologies. The team might waste time using a complex Monte Carlo simulation for a small, simple project where a simple qualitative analysis would suffice, or vice versa. They might use a probability impact matrix that doesn't reflect the organization's actual definitions of high, medium, and low. 2. Repeating past mistakes and ignoring historical wisdom. This is one of the most costly and common failures, as follows. First, reinventing the wheel for risk responses. The team spends time and brainpower devising risk responses for threats that have already been effectively mitigated on past projects. This is a massive waste of resources. Second, failing to learn from failures. The project is blindsided by a risk that a previous project already encountered and documented in the lessons learned repository. A poor organizational process assets analysis means this valuable historical data is never consulted, dooming the project to repeat the same expensive mistakes. Third, missing critical risk categories. If the organization's standard risk breakdown structure is ignored, the team might rely solely on their own experience, potentially missing entire categories of risk, e.g., specific regulatory, supply chain, or legacy system integration risks that are common in the organization. 3. Inefficient and inconsistent execution. The day-to-day process of managing risk becomes chaotic and poorly understood, as follows. First, unclear roles and responsibilities. Without leveraging established role definitions, no one knows who is responsible for identifying risks, who analyzes them, who can approve a risk response, or who controls the contingency budget. This leads to inaction, confusion, and political infighting. Second, lack of standardization. Every project manager and team creates their own risk register format, reporting style, and meeting rhythms. This makes it impossible for senior management to compare risk across projects and for team members moving between projects to get up to speed quickly. Third, poor communication. The risk plan fails to align with the organization's standard communication channels and reporting requirements. Critical risks aren't escalated to the right people at the right time, or conversely, the steering committee is bombarded with trivial risk updates. 4. Direct negative impact on project success. The ultimate harm is to the project's triple constraints, scope, time, and budget, as follows. First, increased number of unidentified risks. The team fails to see risks coming because they aren't using the right lens, or the organizational categories and historical data. Second, ineffective risk responses. When risks are identified, the responses are weak or untested because the team didn't learn what worked and what didn't in the past. Third, blow to credibility and stakeholder trust. When a project is repeatedly hit by unforeseen issues that were actually foreseeable, the project manager and team lose credibility. Stakeholders lose confidence in the project's leadership and the organization's ability to deliver. In conclusion, ignoring organizational process assets during the plan risk management process would be like a chef ignoring their standard recipes, ingredient suppliers, and kitchen protocols. You might eventually create a meal, but it would be inefficient, inconsistent, and far more likely to fail. In short, organizational process assets provide the organizational wisdom, structure, and tools that transform risk management from an ad hoc activity into a disciplined, repeatable, and effective process. Their input is not merely important, it is indispensable. On the other hand, a poor organizational process assets analysis doesn't just make the plan risk management process harder. It severs the project from the accumulated knowledge, established structure, and cultural norms of the organization. The resulting risk management plan is a theoretical exercise, not a practical shield. It creates a false sense of security while leaving the project profoundly vulnerable to known and repeatable threats, ultimately jeopardizing its value and success. This video is finished, but we will have in the next videos. 1. Creation of WBS for different projects using WBS Schedule Pro. 2. Examples of project plans using MS Project. And many more videos. Don't forget to give a thumbs up if you like this video and want us to continue with new topics. Subscribe to the channel. All content is free. You can also comment suggesting topics you would like to see on this channel. Thank you.